The first time my daughter suggested I sell my house, I laughed it off. By the third time, I realized she wasn't joking. By the sixth time, I understood this wasn't a suggestion at all, it was a campaign. And when I finally relented, I had no idea that my surrender would lead to the most satisfying revenge of my 67 years on this earth. "Mom, it's just too much house for you now," Vanessa said, standing in my kitchen with her arms folded across her chest. Her voice had that particular tone, the one she'd perfected over the years, that perfect blend of concern and condescension that made me want to throw something. "Ever since Dad passed, you've been rattling around in here all alone. It doesn't make sense." I continued chopping carrots for the soup I was making, the rhythmic thunk of the knife against the cutting board providing a counterpoint to my daughter's unwelcome advice. My husband Harold had been gone for 3 years now. The silence had been deafening at first, but I'd grown accustomed to it. This house, with its creaking floorboards and familiar shadows, had been our home for 42 years. Every corner held memories. "Living? Mom, you fell last month. If Mrs. Abernathy hadn't come by to borrow sugar..." I tripped over that ridiculous cat of mine. "It happens." I waved my hand dismissively, though the memory of lying on the floor for nearly an hour, unable to reach the phone, still sent a chill through me. "And what about the stairs? The doctor said your arthritis is getting worse. How long before you can't manage them at all?" I turned to face my daughter, taking in her perfectly highlighted hair, her expensive clothes, the way she stood in my humble kitchen as if she were doing an inspection. Vanessa had always been ambitious. As a child, she'd mapped out her future with military precision top college, prestigious law firm, marriage to someone equally ambitious. She'd achieved it all, including a husband who was a successful surgeon and a mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood in town. "I've lived in this house since before you were born," I said quietly. "Your father and I scrimped and saved for the down payment. We painted every room ourselves. You learned to walk in the living room, ride a bike in the driveway. This is home, Vanessa." Something flickered across her face, impatience, perhaps, or frustration that I wasn't being reasonable. "It's a building, Mom, just a building, and it's worth a fortune now. This neighborhood has become prime real estate. You could sell it, invest the money, and have a comfortable cushion for your future." What she didn't say, but what hung in the air between us, was that my future was growing shorter by the day. At 67, I wasn't ancient, but I wasn't young either. My joints ached in the morning, and sometimes names slipped from my mind like water through fingers. But I was still Miss Still Eleanor Wilson, former high school English teacher, avid gardener, and stubborn as the day was long, according to Harold. "I'm not interested in selling," I said firmly, turning back to my soup. That had been 6 months ago. Since then, Vanessa had brought it up with increasing frequency. She'd enlisted her husband, Dr. Richard Thornton, who spoke to me gravely about fall risks and aging-in-place challenges. She'd even brought her real estate friend to one of our Sunday dinners, who just happened to mention how properties in my neighborhood were being snapped up for astonishing prices. I might have continued resisting indefinitely if not for the pipe burst. It happened on a Tuesday in January while I was at my book club. I came home to water cascading down my stairs, my first floor half flooded, and the most horrific sound coming from somewhere within the walls. The plumber who finally arrived at midnight looked grim. "This is just the beginning, Mrs. Wilson," he said, shaking his head. "House this age, pipes this old, you're looking at a complete re-plumb. And from what I can see of your electrical system, that's not far behind." The estimate he gave me the next day made my knees weak. Even with insurance, the out-of-pocket costs would devour most of my savings. As I sat at my waterlogged kitchen table, staring at the numbers, my phone rang. It was Vanessa. Janice was my next-door neighbor and, apparently, my daughter's spy. I sighed. "It's under control, Vanessa." But she came anyway, clicking through my door in her high heels, taking in the fans and dehumidifiers with wide eyes. "Oh my God, Mom, this is worse than I thought." She sat across from me, her expression softening as she reached for my hand. "Mom, I have a proposition. Richard and I have been talking. We want you to come live with us." I blinked. "What?" "Our house is enormous. You know that. We have that whole guest wing that no one ever uses. You could have your own suite bedroom, sitting room, private bath. You'd have your independence, but you wouldn't be alone." "Vanessa, I can't." "And," she continued, squeezing my hand, "you could sell this house. In this market, even with the water damage, you'd make a killing. You could invest it, have financial security." I looked around my kitchen, at the worn countertops Harold and I had installed together, at the height marks on the doorframe showing Vanessa's growth from toddler to teenager. The thought of strangers living here, tearing out walls, erasing our history. "I can't leave," I whispered. Vanessa's expression hardened slightly. "Mom, be practical. You can't afford the repairs. Even if you could, this is just the beginning. What's next? The roof? The foundation? You're on a fixed income. This house is going to bleed you dry." She was right, and I hated it. I'd been avoiding looking at my bank statements for months. Harold's medical bills before he died had eaten through much of our savings, and my teacher's pension only stretched so far. "Think about it," Vanessa said, standing. "That's all I'm asking. Just think about it." I did think about it. For 3 agonizing weeks, I thought about little else. I got 2 more plumbing estimates, both worse than the first. I talked to my financial advisor, who gently suggested that liquidating my primary asset might be the most prudent course. I walked through each room of my house, touching doorframes, windowsills, the banister Harold had sanded and refinished the summer Vanessa left for college. In the end, it wasn't the money that decided me. It was the photograph I found while cleaning out the hall closet, Harold and me standing proudly in front of the house the day we bought it. So young, so full of dreams. I realized with a start that Harold wouldn't want me to bankrupt myself holding on to bricks and wood. Our life together wasn't in the house, it was in me, in my memories, in the person I'd become loving him. When I called Vanessa to tell her my decision, her voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the triumph in it. "You're making the right choice, Mom, I promise. You won't regret it." Things moved quickly after that. Vanessa's real estate friend listed the house, and within a week, we had 3 offers, all well above asking price. I signed papers, arranged for an estate sale for the furniture that wouldn't fit in my new suite, and tried not to think about what I was leaving behind. Moving day was a blur. Vanessa had hired professional movers who packed everything with ruthless efficiency. I stood in my empty living room, saying a silent goodbye, when the young couple who'd bought the house arrived for the final walkthrough. "We're so excited," the woman said, her hand resting on her slightly rounded belly. "We've been looking for a house with character, with history." "This house has plenty of both," I said, my throat tight. "Be good to it." "We will," her husband promised. "We can't wait to raise our family here." I nodded, unable to speak further, and slipped out the front door for the last time. Vanessa and Richard's house mansion really was in Oakwood Estates, the most exclusive neighborhood in our town. Set behind wrought iron gates, the houses were massive, each on at least an acre of manicured grounds. Their home was a sprawling 3-story Georgian with white columns and perfect symmetry. It looked like something from a magazine, not a place where real people lived. The guest wing was beautiful, I had to admit. Spacious, with tall windows overlooking the backyard, a sitting room with a gas fireplace, a bedroom with a king-sized bed, and a bathroom bigger than my old kitchen. Everything was decorated in shades of cream and pale blue, tasteful and impersonal. "We had the interior designer do it specially," Vanessa said proudly. Do you like it? It's lovely, I said, because it was, but it didn't feel like mine. Nothing in this house did. Dinner's at 7, Vanessa informed me. The housekeeper set a place for you. Richard's looking forward to having you join us. I nodded, already feeling overwhelmed. A housekeeper. Set dining times. It was like living in a hotel. That first dinner was a harbinger of things to come. Richard was polite but distant, asking about my health with clinical detachment. Their twin boys, Alexander and Jonathan, 17 and sullen, barely looked up from their phones. Vanessa dominated the conversation, talking about her latest case, the charity gala she was chairing, the vacation they were planning to the Maldives. You'll love having the house to yourself for a couple of weeks, Mom, she said, sipping her wine. Though Marguerite will be here during the day, of course, and the landscapers come on Tuesdays. As the days turned into weeks, I tried to adjust to my new life. I arranged my few possessions in the guest suite, set up my books on the built-in shelves, placed Harold's photograph on the nightstand. I tried to find a routine, but it was difficult in a house that ran according to Vanessa's precise schedule. Breakfast was at 6:30 sharp, served by Marguerite, the housekeeper who viewed me with barely concealed suspicion, as if I might pocket the silver at any moment. Vanessa and Richard left for work by 7:15, the boys for school by 7:30. Then the house fell silent, except for Marguerite's efficient movements as she cleaned around me. I tried to help once, gathering dishes after breakfast. Marguerite had practically snatched them from my hands. Mrs. Thornton prefers that I handle these things, she'd said firmly. Mrs. Thornton, my own daughter, referred to so formally. It struck me then that I didn't really know the woman Vanessa had become. In my mind, she was still partly the little girl who'd collected caterpillars and read books under the covers with a flashlight. But that girl was long gone, replaced by this polished, controlling woman who seemed to find my very presence slightly irritating. The first real conflict came about a month after I moved in. I'd taken to walking around the neighborhood each morning, partly for exercise and partly to escape the oppressive perfection of the house. One day, I returned to find Vanessa waiting for me, her expression tight. Mom, Mrs. Kincaid just called me at work. Mrs. Kincaid was their next-door neighbor, a woman I'd met briefly and found insufferably snobbish. Oh? She said you were talking to her gardener. For nearly 20 minutes. I frowned, confused. Yes, Manuel. He's from Guatemala. We were discussing their native plants. I'm thinking of asking if I could plant a small garden here, maybe along the... Mom, Vanessa interrupted, her voice strained. You can't do that. Can't do what? Talk to gardeners? It's not appropriate, and you certainly can't plant anything without consulting our landscaper. The entire estate is designed with a specific aesthetic in mind. I stared at my daughter, truly seeing her for the first time. I was being friendly, Vanessa, and it's just a small garden. This isn't your house, she said, then immediately looked as if she regretted her words. I mean, of course it's your home now, but there are certain standards in this neighborhood, expectations. Standards that prevent me from talking to the help? I asked quietly. Vanessa sighed. You're twisting my words. Just try to remember where you are now. This isn't your old neighborhood. No, it certainly wasn't. In my old neighborhood, people chatted over fences, borrowed cups of sugar, watched each other's houses when someone went on vacation. Here, each mansion was an island, separated by perfect lawns and invisible barriers of wealth and status. The garden issue faded, but other conflicts arose. Vanessa objected to my habit of reading in the formal living room. That's really for entertaining, Mom. The sitting room in your suite is for daily use. Richard complained when I used spices in the kitchen that left lingering aromas. We usually keep cooking scents contained to the catering kitchen downstairs. Even the twins seemed annoyed by my presence, as if their grandmother was an embarrassing imposition. The worst part was the constant supervision. Vanessa texted me multiple times a day, checking on my whereabouts, my activities, my health. She'd installed some sort of smart home system that let her monitor the house remotely, ostensibly for security, but I sometimes felt I was being watched. Richard had given me a medical alert bracelet that I was expected to wear at all times, just in case. I'd gone from independent homeowner to supervised dependent in the space of a few months, and the transition was suffocating me. The breaking point came 3 months after I'd moved in. I was sitting in my suite, staring out the window at the perfectly manicured lawn, when there was a knock at my door. It was Alexander, the more thoughtful of the twins. "Grandma?" he said hesitantly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said, gesturing for him to come in. Alexander rarely sought me out, and I was touched by the overture. He sat on the edge of the armchair looking uncomfortable. "It's about college. Mom and Dad want me to go pre-med, follow Dad into surgery. But I want to study environmental science, climate change, sustainability, that kind of thing." I nodded, understanding immediately, and they don't approve. He looked down at his hands. "But I don't care about that. I want to do something that matters." I felt a surge of affection for this boy, who beneath the sullen teenage exterior had a conscience, a passion. "Your mother has always been practical," I said carefully. Even as a child, she thought about the future in terms of security, of tangible success. "Were you disappointed?" Alexander asked suddenly. "That she became so like this?" The question caught me off guard. Had I been disappointed? I thought of the little girl who'd once told me she wanted to be a veterinarian because animals needed someone to speak for them. Somewhere along the way, that empathy had been redirected, channeled into ambition and acquisition. "I wanted her to be happy," I said finally. "I thought she was." Alexander shrugged. "She's successful. I'm not sure that's the same thing." Out of the mouths of babes, I thought. "What does your brother think about your college plans?" "Jonathan, he's all in on Dad's plan. Harvard, med school, the whole track. He and Mom are the same, always thinking about how things look, what people will think." He hesitated. "That's why they wanted you to move in, you know." I felt a chill. "What do you mean?" Alexander looked uncomfortable. I probably shouldn't say anything. "Please," I said quietly. "I'd like to know." He sighed. "It was after the Richardsons put their mother in that retirement community." Mom was horrified. She kept saying how it looked, abandoning family like that. She and Dad had this big fight about it, and then suddenly she was talking about having you move in with us. He looked at me apologetically. It wasn't really about helping you. It was about how it would look if they didn't." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd suspected something similar, but hearing it confirmed was another matter entirely. I wasn't a beloved mother being cared for. I was a prop in Vanessa's carefully constructed image of familial perfection. "I see," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Thank you for being honest with me, Alexander." After he left, I sat for a long time, watching the shadows lengthen across the perfect lawn. I thought about my house, now occupied by the young couple and their future child. I thought about Harold, who had always seen through pretense and valued authenticity above all else. What would he think of this situation? Of me, allowing myself to be reduced to a dependent, a box checked on Vanessa's list of social obligations? That evening at dinner, I watched my daughter and her family with new eyes. The careful conversation, the perfect table setting, the way Vanessa subtly directed everything what to discuss, how much wine to pour, when to move from one course to the next. It was a performance, and I was merely a supporting character. As Marguerite served the dessert individual soufflés that had to be eaten immediate, Vanessa's phone chimed. She glanced at it, her expression changing. The Hendersons have offered their vacation home in Aspen for the charity auction, she announced. That's a $50,000 value at least. Excellent, Richard murmured. That should put us well over last year's total. We need to do something to thank them, Vanessa continued, tapping on her phone. Perhaps invite them to the lake house for a weekend. Or send a case of that Bordeaux they liked at the Christmas party. I watched this exchange, thinking about Alexander's revelation, about the young couple starting their family in my old house, about Manuel the gardener who wasn't deemed worthy of conversation. And suddenly, with perfect clarity, I knew what I needed to do. The plan began to form in my mind, tentative at first, then with increasing certainty. It would take time, preparation, careful maneuvering. But for the first time since moving into this mausoleum of a house, I felt a spark of purpose, of righteous anger. My daughter had forced me to sell my home and move in with her, for appearance's sake. She'd taken my independence, my dignity, my sense of belonging. But what she didn't realize, what she'd never understood, was that I hadn't survived 67 years, a 39-year marriage, and a teaching career in public schools without developing a backbone of steel. Vanessa had made a critical error. She'd underestimated me. And as I sat there, smiling politely while she discussed the social implications of vacation home donations, I made a silent promise to myself and to Harold's memory. I would reclaim my life, and in doing so, I would teach my daughter the lesson she'd never learned, that true worth had nothing to do with appearances, with status, with what the neighbors might think. It had to do with how you treated people, especially those who had given you life and love. The plan would start tomorrow, and by the time I was finished, Vanessa's perfect world would never be the same. The first step in my plan was to understand exactly what I was dealing with. For that, I needed allies, and I suspected I already had one in Alexander. The morning after our conversation, I found him alone in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone while eating cereal. "Good morning," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Marguerite had the day off, which meant the house felt slightly less oppressive. "I was wondering if you might help me with something." Alexander looked up, curious. "Sure, Grandma. What do you need?" "I'd like to understand more about this house, the layout, the grounds, any peculiarities I should know about." He frowned slightly. "Peculiarities." I smiled reassuringly. "Just trying to get my bearings. This place is like a maze to me." Alexander shrugged. "I can give you a tour if you want. Mom and Dad are both at work all day, and Jonathan has debate team practice." That afternoon, Alexander showed me parts of the house I'd never seen: the wine cellar with bottles worth more than my old car, the home theater with seating for 20, the catering kitchen that was bigger than my entire first apartment. But most importantly, he showed me the home office, where Vanessa kept all her important documents. "Mom's super organized," Alexander explained, gesturing to the filing cabinets. "Everything's labeled and color-coded. She says a disorganized home leads to a disorganized mind." I nodded, filing this information away. "And what about the security system? I've noticed all the cameras." Alexander rolled his eyes. "Mom's paranoid about security. The whole place is wired cameras, motion sensors, those smart locks that she can control from her phone." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "She can see who comes and goes, what time lights are turned on and off, even adjust the thermostat remotely." "That seems excessive," I said carefully. "Welcome to my world," Alexander sighed. "Privacy is a foreign concept around here." After our tour, I thanked Alexander and retreated to my suite, where I began making notes. The house had 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, the separate guest wing where I stayed, multiple living areas, and enough unused space to house a small village. It was obscene, really, all that space for 4 people, 5, counting me. The next phase of my plan required information of a different sort. For that, I needed to venture beyond the gilded cage of Oakwood Estates. The following day, I told Vanessa I was going to visit my old friend Meredith for lunch. This wasn't entirely a lie. I did see Meredith briefly before making my way to the community center downtown where I'd taught adult literacy classes after retiring from the high school. The center was bustling with activity ESL classes, job training programs, after-school activities for kids whose parents worked late. It felt alive in a way that Vanessa's sterile mansion never could. Eleanor Wilson, as I live and breathe. The booming voice belonged to Sophia Reyes, the center's director and my former colleague. She enveloped me in a warm hug. Where have you been hiding yourself? We've missed you around here. I explained my situation. The pipe burst. Selling my house, moving in with Vanessa. I kept my tone neutral, but Sophia knew me too well. You hate it, she said flatly when I'd finished. I sighed. It's complicated. Complicated my foot. You look like a bird in a cage, Eleanor. She studied me with shrewd eyes. So what brings you here today? Not just catching up, I'm guessing. I need information, I admitted, about housing needs in the community, specifically emergency housing for women and families. Sophia's eyebrows rose. That's a big issue around here, as you know. The waiting list for the women's shelter is always full. Families displaced by the new development on the east side are doubling up with relatives or living in motels. She leaned forward. What are you thinking, Eleanor? I'm not sure yet, I said truthfully. But I have resources now from selling my house, and I want to do something meaningful with them. Sophia introduced me to Maria Gonzalez, who ran the Family Services Division. Maria's eyes lit up when Sophia explained my interest. We're desperate for transitional housing, Maria said. Places where families can stay for a few months while they get back on their feet. The motels are expensive and unsafe, but there are so few alternatives. I spent the afternoon with Maria, learning about the housing crisis that existed just miles from Vanessa's privileged enclave. I learned about women fleeing domestic violence with nowhere to go, families evicted when their apartment buildings were converted to luxury condos, elderly people on fixed incomes priced out of neighborhoods they'd lived in for decades. By the time I left the center, my mind was racing with possibilities. The seed of an idea that had formed the night before was now taking root, growing into something more substantial, more audacious than I'd initially imagined. That evening at dinner, I decided to test the waters. I've been thinking about what to do with the money from selling my house, I said casually as Marguerite served the main course. Vanessa looked up sharply. What do you mean? We discussed this. You're going to invest it for your future. Yes, but I don't need all of it for that. I was thinking of donating some to a good cause. Richard nodded approvingly. Charitable giving is excellent for tax purposes. We could connect you with our financial advisor. What kind of cause, Grandma? Alexander asked, genuinely interested. Housing insecurity, I said. Did you know there's a waiting list of over 200 families for emergency housing in our county? Vanessa's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Mom, that's admirable, but you need to think about your future. Medical costs, long-term care, these things are expensive. I'm aware, I said dryly, but I have more than enough, especially now that I'm not paying for housing. I smiled at her, thanks to you. She returned the smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. We just want you to be secure. Speaking of security, I said, changing tactics, I noticed the empty guest house at the back of the property. Does anyone ever use that? The guest house was a charming 2-bedroom cottage behind the main house, hidden from view by a stand of mature oak trees. Alexander had shown it to me during our tour, explaining that it had been built for Richard's mother, who had ultimately refused to leave her home in Boston. The guest house? Vanessa frowned. No, it's just sitting there. Why? I was thinking it might be nice to have my own space. Not that I don't appreciate the suite. I added quickly, but I'm used to having a kitchen, being able to cook when I want. You want to move into the guest house? Vanessa looked genuinely surprised. It would give you all more privacy, I pointed out. And me as well. Richard and Vanessa exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. We'll discuss it, Vanessa said finally. Later that night, I heard them arguing in their bedroom. Though I couldn't make out the exact words, the tone was clear. Vanessa opposed, Richard trying to reason with her. I smiled to myself. The first pieces were moving into place. The next morning, Vanessa approached me as I was reading in the garden. Richard and I have discussed your request, she said formally, as if delivering a business proposition. We think it might be a good arrangement, but the guest house would need some updating before it would be suitable. I'm happy to pay for any renovations, I said quickly. I nodded, hiding my satisfaction. The guest house was crucial to my plan, and Vanessa had just handed it to me without realizing what she was setting in motion. Over the next few weeks, I continued my research, making regular trips to the community center under the guise of visiting old friends. I reconnected with former colleagues, students, neighbors, building a network of people who might be willing to help when the time came. I was careful to keep these activities separate from my life at Vanessa's, always returning in time for the ritualistic family dinner, playing the role of the grateful mother. Meanwhile, renovations began on the guest house. Vanessa's designer, a rail-thin woman named Clarissa with an inexplicable British accent, Alexander informed me she was actually from New Jersey, presented elaborate plans involving marble countertops and custom cabinetry. It's too much, I protested when I saw the designs. I just need something simple and functional. Mom, please, Vanessa sighed. We have standards to maintain. What if we want to use it for actual guests later on? The unspoken words hung in the air. After you're gone. I bit my tongue, reminding myself to stay focused on the larger goal. As the renovations progressed, I began the next phase of my plan, understanding the legal aspects of what I intended to do. For this, I needed professional help, but I couldn't use any of Vanessa's connections. Fortunately, I had my own resources. James Cooper had been a student of mine 30 years ago, a bright boy from a troubled home who'd found refuge in books. Now he was a respected attorney specializing in real estate and property law. I arranged to meet him at a coffee shop downtown, well away from Vanessa's social circle. Mrs. Wilson, he greeted me warmly, standing as I approached his table. It's been too long. James, I smiled, taking his offered hand. Thank you for meeting me, and please, it's Eleanor. Once we were settled with our coffee, I explained my situation selling my house, moving in with Vanessa, the growing realization that I'd made a terrible mistake. I'm sorry to hear that, James said sincerely, but I'm not sure how I can help with a family matter. If I invest my own money in it, establish residency there, what rights do I have? James frowned slightly. Are you concerned your daughter might try to evict you? Not exactly. It's more about what I might be able to do with the space, legally speaking, if I were to invite guests to stay with me, for instance. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You're talking about establishing some sort of shelter or transitional housing on your daughter's property. I nodded. Hypothetically speaking, of course. For the next hour, we discussed the intricacies of my plan. James took copious notes, occasionally shaking his head or raising his eyebrows at the audacity of what I was proposing. As I left the coffee shop, I felt a mixture of anxiety and exhilaration. What I was planning was bold, possibly foolhardy, and would certainly destroy my relationship with Vanessa. But the more time I spent in her controlled, privileged world, the more convinced I became that this was the right course of action. The guest house renovations were completed by the end of May, 2 months after I'd first proposed moving into it. Despite my objections, Vanessa had insisted on the marble countertops, the high-end appliances, the custom window treatments. The result was beautiful but sterile, like a high-end hotel suite. "It's perfect," Vanessa declared as we toured the finished space. "Much better than that dated little house you had before." I bit back a retort, reminding myself that soon, very soon, I would be free of her judgment and control. The day I moved into the guest house felt like a small victory. Alexander helped me carry my few possessions from the main house, setting up my books and photographs with surprising care. "This is nice," he said, looking around the space. "More like a real home." "That's the idea," I replied, arranging Harold's photograph on the bedside table. "A place where people can feel comfortable, welcome." Alexander gave me a curious look. "People? I thought it was just for you." I smiled enigmatically. "For now." That evening, I declined the invitation to dinner at the main house, saying I wanted to settle into my new space. Instead, I made a simple meal in my new kitchen and ate it on the small patio outside, watching the sunset and thinking about Harold. He would have hated Vanessa's mansion with its pretensions and rules, but he would have loved this little cottage. It reminded me, in some ways, of our first apartment, compact but well-designed, with a garden just outside the door. As darkness fell, I took out the folder where I'd been collecting my notes, research, and the preliminary legal documents James had prepared for me. The Eleanor Wilson Foundation for Transitional Housing now existed on paper, with me as its director and sole trustee. I had transferred a significant portion of the proceeds from my house sale into its accounts. The foundation's mission was simple: to provide temporary housing for women and families in crisis. And its first property would be this guest house. James had helped me structure everything legally. Since I would be living here as well, serving as an on-site manager, we could classify it as a shared residence rather than a commercial enterprise, bypassing some of the zoning restrictions. We'd still need to be careful about the number of residents at any one time, and there were fire code regulations to consider, but the basic framework was sound. The tricky part would be Vanessa. While she couldn't legally prevent me from having guests stay with me, she owned the property and could make things very difficult if she chose to. The key would be to establish the program firmly before she realized what was happening, to create a situation where shutting it down would cause more social embarrassment than allowing it to continue. For that, I needed to move quickly and strategically. The next morning, I called Maria at the community center. "I'm ready," I told her. "The space can accommodate a single mother with up to 2 children. It's not much, but it's a start." "Eleanor, that's wonderful." Maria's voice was warm with gratitude. "I have the perfect candidate, Lucia and her daughter, Sophia. They've been living in a motel for 3 months since they left Lucia's abusive partner. She's working 2 jobs trying to save for an apartment, but the deposits and first month's rent are so high." "When can they come?" I asked. "Is tomorrow too soon?" I thought about Vanessa's schedule. She and Richard were hosting a dinner party tomorrow night, which would keep them occupied and away from the guest house. Tomorrow is perfect. After hanging up, I felt a momentary pang of doubt. Was I doing the right thing? This would inevitably lead to a confrontation with Vanessa, possibly a permanent rupture in our relationship. Was I prepared for that? I looked at Harold's photograph, at his kind eyes, and the slight smile that always seemed to suggest he knew something others didn't. What would he advise? The decision made, I spent the rest of the day preparing the second bedroom for Lucia and Sophia. I made up the bed with fresh linens, set out towels in the bathroom, and stocked the kitchen with basic groceries. I wanted them to feel welcome, to know that this was a place of safety and respect. As I worked, I thought about the young couple who had bought my old house, about the baby they were expecting. I hoped they were making that house a true home, filling it with love and laughter as Harold and I had done, as I had tried to do for Vanessa. That evening, I received a text from Vanessa. Reminder: Henderson's dinner tomorrow night, cocktails at 7, dinner at 8, business casual. I texted back, won't be able to make it, have other plans. Her response was immediate. What plans? This is important, Mom. The Hendersons are major donors to the hospital foundation. I didn't respond. Let her wonder. Let her get used to the idea that I was no longer at her beck and call. The next day, I met Lucia and Sophia at the community center. Lucia was in her late 20s, with tired eyes but a determined set to her jaw. Sophia was 6, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit and regarding me with solemn dark eyes. Mrs. Wilson has a place where you can stay for a while, Maria explained gently. A safe place, with your own room. How much will it cost? Lucia asked immediately, her accent thickening with anxiety. Nothing, I said firmly. The foundation covers all costs. Your job is to save your money, find permanent housing, and build a stable life for Sophia. Lucia's eyes filled with tears. Why would you do this for strangers? I thought about Vanessa, about the values I tried to instill in her that seemed to have been forgotten in her pursuit of status and wealth. Because we're all connected, I said simply, what affects one of us affects all of us. I drove them to Oakwood Estates, feeling a flutter of nervousness as we approached the imposing gates. I punched in the code, holding my breath until the gates swung open. As we drove up the long driveway toward the main house, I could see Lucia's eyes widening. You live here? She asked incredulously. In the guest house, I clarified, driving past the main house to the secluded cottage beyond the oak trees. This will be your home for now. I showed them around the guest house, explaining the rules: no drugs, no alcohol, no visitors without prior approval. Lucia nodded solemnly at each point, while Sophia cautiously explored the bedroom that would be theirs. I work nights at the hospital cafeteria and days at the daycare center, Lucia explained. Sophia comes with me to the daycare, but I can watch her in the evenings, I offered. I was a teacher for 40 years. I know a thing or two about children. Lucia's relief was palpable. Thank you so much. As they settled in, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Vanessa and a text. Where are you? The Hendersons will be here in an hour. I texted back, enjoying my new independence. Have a lovely evening. Then I turned off my phone and joined Lucia and Sophia for a simple dinner in our shared kitchen. As we ate, Sophia gradually warmed up, telling me about her school, her favorite books, the rabbit, named Mr. Hoppity, who had been a gift from her grandmother in El Salvador. It felt right, this small act of defiance and compassion. For the first time since moving to Vanessa's property, I felt like myself again, Eleanor Wilson, who had spent her life trying to make a difference in the world, one student, one family at a time. Later, after Lucia had left for her night shift and Sophia was asleep, I sat on the patio watching the lights in the main house, where Vanessa's dinner party would be in full swing. I could imagine the scene: perfectly set table, the catered meal, the carefully orchestrated conversations about charity galas and vacation homes. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation I'd been anticipating. Vanessa would discover what I'd done, and she would be furious. But I was ready. The foundation was legally established, the arrangements with the community center formalized. Most importantly, Lucia and Sophia were now in residence, their presence a tangible reality that couldn't be easily dismissed. The guest house was just the beginning. The Eleanor Wilson Foundation had bigger plans that would transform not just Lucia's life, but perhaps even Vanessa's understanding of what truly mattered. And if not, well, I was 67 years old, too old to live by someone else's rules, too experienced to be intimidated by social disapproval. Harold would be proud, I thought, looking up at the stars. He had always believed in standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult, especially when it was difficult. With that comforting thought, I went inside to prepare for the battle ahead. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. I was making breakfast for Sophia the next morning, pancakes shaped like animals, a skill I'd perfected during Vanessa's childhood, when there was a sharp knock at the door. Sophia, still in her pajamas, looked up from her coloring book with wide eyes. I knew who it was, of course. I'd been anticipating this moment since Lucia and Sophia had arrived yesterday. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door to find Vanessa standing there, still in her running clothes, her face flushed with exertion and anger. "Mom," she said tightly, "we need to talk. Now." "Good morning to you too, Vanessa," I replied calmly. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" Her eyes narrowed at my composure. She stepped into the guest house, then froze when she saw Sophia at the kitchen table. "Who is that?" she demanded. "This is Sophia," I said, closing the door behind her. "Sophia, this is my daughter, Vanessa." Sophia gave a shy wave before returning to her coloring. Vanessa stared at the child, then at me, her expression a mixture of confusion and growing alarm. "Have you taken in strangers?" "Not strangers," I corrected. "Residents of the Eleanor Wilson Foundation for Transitional Housing. Sophia and her mother Lucia are staying here while they get back on their feet." Vanessa's face went through a remarkable series of expressions: disbelief, shock, and finally fury. "You've turned our guest house into a homeless shelter, without discussing it with us? Have you lost your mind?" I glanced at Sophia, who had stopped coloring and was watching us with concern. "Let's continue this conversation outside," I suggested, keeping my voice light. Once we were on the patio, Vanessa exploded. "This is completely unacceptable. You can't just move people onto our property without permission. Do you have any idea of the liability issues? The security concerns? What will the neighbors think?" "The neighbors don't need to know unless you tell them," I pointed out. "The guest house is quite private, as you know. As for liability, the foundation has insurance coverage. I've thought this through, Vanessa." "The foundation? What foundation?" She was practically sputtering now. "The Eleanor Wilson Foundation for Transitional Housing," I repeated. "I've established it with the proceeds from selling my house. It's all perfectly legal and above board." "Legal? There are zoning laws, Mom. Residential neighborhoods like this don't allow commercial operations." "It's not commercial," I explained patiently. "I live here too. I'm simply sharing my residence with guests, which is my right. My attorney has confirmed this." "Your attorney?" Vanessa's voice rose an octave. "You consulted an attorney about this scheme, but didn't think to mention it to your own daughter, to the people whose property you're using." I met her gaze steadily. "Would you have agreed if I had asked?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "That's not the point," she finally said. "The point is that this is our home, our property. You can't just..." "Can't just what? Help people in need? Provide a safe place for a child? Use my own resources the way I see fit?" I felt my own anger rising now. "You wanted me here, Vanessa. You insisted I sell my house and move in with you. But you didn't want me. You wanted a prop, a box to check off to show what a dutiful daughter you are." Vanessa recoiled as if I'd slapped her. "That's not true. We were worried about you living alone after the pipe burst. We wanted to help." "It's not your space," Vanessa hissed. "It's on our property. We're allowing you to live here." "Allowing?" I repeated, the word like acid on my tongue. "Yes, that sums it up perfectly. Your generosity comes with conditions, with expectations. Just like everything else in your life." Vanessa's face flushed deeper. "That's unfair. We've given you everything." "You've given me a beautiful cage," I interrupted. and now you're upset because I've opened the door and let others in." We stared at each other, the gulf between us wider than it had ever been. I saw in her face the little girl who had once brought me dandelions, the teenager who had rolled her eyes at my advice, the young woman who had gradually become a stranger to me. When had it happened? When had my daughter become this person who valued appearances over compassion, control over connection? "Those people need to be gone by the end of the day," Vanessa said, finally, her voice cold. "Or we'll have them removed." "On what grounds?" I challenged. "I've broken no laws, I've violated no agreements." "If you try to evict them, it will become a legal matter, and I don't think you want that kind of publicity." Wealthy couple evicts domestic violence survivor and child, not a great headline for someone so concerned with appearances. Vanessa's eyes widened at the implied threat. "You wouldn't." "I don't want to," I said honestly. "I don't want to fight, Vanessa. I want to do something meaningful with the time I have left, something that matters." "And living with us doesn't matter?" Her voice cracked slightly, revealing a vulnerability beneath the anger. "Not the way you've arranged it," I said gently. "Not as a dependent, a burden to be managed. I spent my life teaching, helping others find their voice, their potential. I can't stop being that person just because I'm older now." Vanessa ran a hand through her hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Harold that it made my heart ache. "Richard will have a fit when he hears about this, and the boys. God, Mom, have you thought about how this affects them? Their friends coming over, seeing this." "Seeing what?" "People less fortunate than themselves. That might be the most valuable education they could receive." I thought of Alexander, his concern for the environment, his questioning of the values his parents held dear. "Alexander already understands more than you give him credit for." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "Alexander? Has he been helping you with this?" "No," I said quickly, not wanting to get him in trouble. "But he's shown more interest in my life, my thoughts, than you have since I moved here." That struck home. Vanessa looked away, her jaw working. "We'll discuss this tonight," she said finally. "As a family, with Richard, 7 o'clock in the main house. Until then, keep those people out of sight." She turned and walked away, her back rigid with anger. I watched her go, feeling a mixture of sadness and determination. The battle lines had been drawn, but this was just the opening skirmish. The real fight was yet to come. When I went back inside, Sophia was standing just inside the door, her small face solemn. "Are we in trouble?" she asked in a small voice. I knelt down to her level, my knees protesting the movement. "No, sweetheart, you're not in trouble. My daughter is just surprised, that's all. Sometimes grown-ups get surprised and it makes them upset." Sophia nodded wisely. "My mommy gets upset sometimes too, but then she does her deep breaths and feels better." "That's very smart," I said, smiling. "Your mommy sounds like a wise woman." "She is," Sophia agreed. "She says we're going to have our own house someday, with a garden like yours." "I believe she will make that happen," I said, standing up with a slight wince. "Now, how about those pancakes? I think I was making a giraffe for you." As I finished making breakfast for Sophia, my mind was racing. I needed to prepare for the family meeting tonight. Vanessa would have Richard firmly on her side. He was always supportive of her in public, whatever his private reservations might be. The twins would be wild cards. Jonathan would likely follow his parents' lead, but Alexander might be an ally, if I could speak to him first. After Lucia returned from her morning shift and took over watching Sophia, I walked up to the main house. It felt strange now, entering through the front door like a visitor rather than a resident. Marguerite answered my knock, her expression carefully neutral. "Is Alexander home?" I asked. I found Alexander in his bedroom, surrounded by textbooks and notebooks, his laptop open to what looked like a research paper. He looked up in surprise when I knocked on his open door. "Grandma, what's up?" "I need to talk to you," I said, closing the door behind me. "About what's happening with the guest house." He set aside his books, giving me his full attention. "Mom's been on the warpath all morning. I heard her and Dad arguing before he left for the hospital." "Something about you turning the guest house into a shelter?" I explained the situation, the foundation, Lucia and Sophia, my confrontation with Vanessa that morning. Alexander listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. "That's pretty badass, Grandma," he said when I'd finished. "Standing up to Mom like that." Families living in cars, women staying in abusive relationships because they have nowhere else to go. Meanwhile, this guest house was sitting empty. He nodded slowly. "I get it, I really do. But Mom's not going to see it that way. She's all about property values and neighborhood standards and what the Hendersons will think." He rolled his eyes at the last part. 7 o'clock. Your mother wants to discuss the situation." "Discuss?" Alexander repeated with a snort. "You mean she wants everyone to gang up on you until you give in?" "Probably," I admitted. "But I'm not giving in on this, Alexander. It's too important." He studied me for a moment, then smiled. "You know, I always thought of you as this sweet, traditional grandma who baked cookies and knitted sweaters. But you're kind of a revolutionary, aren't you?" I laughed. "I'm just an old woman who's tired of playing by rules that don't make sense anymore." I felt a rush of affection for this boy, this young man who seemed to have inherited the best parts of both his parents, Vanessa's determination and Richard's capacity for empathy. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. I called James to update him on the situation and to make sure all our legal bases were covered. I spoke with Maria at the community center, warning her that there might be some turbulence, but assuring her that the foundation's work would continue. And I spent time with Lucia and Sophia, helping them feel secure despite the uncertainty. By 6:45, I was as ready as I'd ever be. I walked up to the main house, noting the 3 cars in the circular driveway, Vanessa's sleek BMW, Richard's Tesla, and the shared SUV that the twins drove. Everyone was home, gathered for what promised to be a contentious family meeting. I could hear voices from the formal dining room, Vanessa's clipped tones, Richard's deeper rumble, the occasional comment from one of the twins. Taking a deep breath, I walked in. The conversation stopped abruptly when I appeared. They were all seated around the massive dining table, Vanessa at one end, Richard at the other, the twins on one side. My place was set on the other side, alone. It felt like a tribunal rather than a family discussion. "Mom," Vanessa said coolly, "right on time." "Hello, everyone," I said, taking my seat. "I understand we have some things to discuss." Richard cleared his throat. "Eleanor, Vanessa has told me about your initiative with the guest house. While we appreciate your desire to help others, we have serious concerns about the way you've gone about this." "Without consultation," Vanessa added. "Without consideration for how this affects our family, our property, our standing in the community." I nodded, acknowledging their points without conceding them. I understand those concerns, but I also understand that there are women and children in this community who have nowhere safe to sleep tonight, who have to choose between homelessness and returning to abusive situations, who work multiple jobs and still can't afford the security deposits for an apartment. "There are shelters for that," Richard said dismissively. "With waiting lists months long," I countered, "and conditions that no one in this room would tolerate for a day, let alone weeks or months." "That's not our problem," Vanessa said flatly. "It is our problem," Alexander interjected suddenly. "Or it should be. We have more than we need, way more. That guest house was just sitting empty. Why shouldn't it be used to help people?" Vanessa turned to her son, surprise and betrayal flashing across her face. Alexander, you don't understand the implications, the liability issues, the potential impact on property values. I understand that you're more worried about property values than people's lives, Alexander shot back. That's enough, Richard said sharply. This isn't about property values. It's about your grandmother making unilateral decisions about our property without consulting us. It's about respect. Respect? I repeated, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Like the respect you showed me when you decided I couldn't live independently anymore. When you pressured me to sell my home? When you established rules about where I could go in this house, who I could talk to, what I could cook in the kitchen. Richard had the grace to look uncomfortable. That was for your own good, Eleanor. After the fall, the pipe burst. You were struggling. I was managing. I corrected. As I had for the 3 years since Harold died. As I had my entire adult life. But you two decided I needed saving, and more importantly, that you knew best how to save me. We gave you a home, Vanessa said, her voice rising. We welcomed you into our family. You gave me a beautifully decorated prison, I replied evenly. And you welcomed me as an accessory, not a person with my own needs, my own purpose. Jonathan, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Grandma, I think what Mom and Dad are trying to say is that they're worried about you. Living with strangers, people you don't know, it could be dangerous. I appreciate that concern, Jonathan. But Lucia and Sophia aren't strangers anymore. They're people I've chosen to help, who have been carefully vetted by the community center. And frankly, the only danger I've felt since moving here has been the danger of losing myself, my identity, in the role you all created for me. This is ridiculous, Vanessa snapped. We're talking about trespassers on our property, and you're making it sound like we're the villains. They're not trespassers, I said firmly. They're my guests. And I'm not casting you as villains, Vanessa. I'm asking you to see beyond your bubble of privilege and recognize that you have the power to make a real difference in people's lives. By turning our home into a shelter? Richard asked incredulously. By allowing me to use the guest house where I live to provide temporary housing for one family at a time. By recognizing that the security you're so concerned about isn't just about alarm systems and gates, but about creating a community where everyone has their basic needs met. And if we refuse? Vanessa challenged. If we insist that these people leave our property? I met her gaze steadily. Then you'll have to evict me as well, because I won't abandon them. A stunned silence fell over the table. Even Vanessa seemed taken aback by my resolve. You would choose strangers over your own family? She asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not choosing anyone over anyone else. I said gently, I'm choosing to live according to the values. I've always held the values I thought I'd taught you. Compassion, generosity, using what we have to help others. Those are just words, Vanessa said dismissively. Nice sentiments that don't account for the real world, for practical considerations. They're more than words to the people who need help, I countered. To Lucia, who left an abusive partner with nothing but her daughter and the clothes on their backs. Who works 2 jobs and still can't afford an apartment. Who deserves a safe place to rebuild her life. One family, Alexander said suddenly. That's all we're talking about, right? One family at a time, staying in the guest house until they can get on their feet. I nodded. That's the current arrangement. Eventually, the foundation hopes to acquire additional properties, but for now, it's just the guest house and just one family at a time. Alexander turned to his parents. How can that possibly hurt us? The guest house is practically invisible from the main house. No one would even know they're there unless we tell them. It's the principle, Vanessa insisted. It's our property. Actually, I said carefully, I've been meaning to discuss that. Part of the renovation costs for the guest house came from my funds from the sale of my house. According to my attorney, That gives me certain rights as a co-investor in the property. Richard's eyebrows shot up. You're threatening legal action against us? Your own family? I'm stating facts, I said calmly. Facts that would become relevant if you attempt to evict Lucia and Sophia. I would prefer not to go that route. I would prefer that we find a way to make this work as a family. Another silence fell, this one tense with unspoken threats and calculations. I could almost see the wheels turning in Vanessa's mind, weighing the potential embarrassment of a legal battle against the discomfort of having those people on her property. 1 month, she said finally. They can stay for 1 month while they find other arrangements. After that, the guest house returns to its intended purpose. 3 months, I countered. It takes time to save for security deposits, first and last month's rent, and the foundation will need to find or develop other housing options. Vanessa looked to Richard, who gave a slight nod. Fine, 3 months, but there are conditions. They don't use the main house facilities, the pool, the tennis court. They enter and exit through the back gate only, and this arrangement is not publicized in any way. I considered these terms. They were restrictive, even discriminatory, but they would give Lucia and Sophia a safe place to stay while I worked on more permanent solutions. And they would give me time to help Vanessa see beyond her prejudices, to recognize the humanity in those she sought to exclude. Agreed, I said finally. With one addition, Sophia is welcome to use the pool when accompanied by me, during times when you're not entertaining. That child has had little enough joy in her life. Vanessa's jaw tightened, but Richard spoke before she could object. That seems reasonable, as long as you're with her and responsible for her. Thank you, I said, meaning it. This was a small victory but an important one, a crack in the wall of privilege and exclusion that Vanessa had built around her life. The meeting broke up shortly after that, with Vanessa declaring that dinner would be served in 20 minutes. I excused myself, saying I needed to check on Lucia and Sophia to let them know they could stay. As I walked back to the guest house in the gathering dusk, I felt a curious mixture of emotions: relief that the immediate crisis had been averted, determination to make the most of the 3-month reprieve, and a deep sadness for the distance between Vanessa and me. Somewhere along the way, we had lost each other. I hoped it wasn't too late to find our way back. But first, I had a foundation to build, a family to help, and a revolution of compassion to nurture. The battle tonight had been just the beginning. The real work and the real confrontation still lay ahead. The 3-month agreement turned out to be just the beginning. As days stretched into weeks, the dynamics between the main house and the guest house shifted in ways I hadn't anticipated. Vanessa maintained her cool distance, speaking to me only when necessary, usually about practical matters related to the arrangement, as she called it. Richard was more cordial, but clearly uncomfortable, especially when Lucia was present. The twins, however, surprised me. Jonathan, who I'd expected to follow his parents' lead, began stopping by the guest house on his way home from school. At first, he claimed he was just checking if I needed anything, an obvious errand from his mother. But soon he was lingering, drawn into conversation with Lucia about her home country, her journey to the United States, her dreams for Sophia. She's actually really cool, he confided to me one afternoon as we watched Sophia play in the small garden I'd planted behind the guest house. The stuff she's been through, I can't even imagine. Alexander, already sympathetic to the cause, went further. He began researching housing inequality for a school project, interviewing Lucia and other families at the community center. He brought his friends to meet me, introducing me not just as his grandmother, but as the founder of a housing justice foundation. The first real crack in Vanessa's opposition came about 6 weeks into our arrangement. I was in the garden with Sophia, teaching her how to tell when the cherry tomatoes were ripe, when Vanessa appeared at the gate. She stood watching us for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Mom," she said finally, "do you have a minute?" I nodded to Sophia to continue checking the tomatoes and walked over to my daughter. "What is it?" Vanessa glanced at Sophia, then back to me. "The Westcott Foundation dinner is next Saturday. They're giving Richard an award for his work with the Children's Hospital. We'd like you to attend." It was the first social invitation I'd received since moving to the guest house. "As a family member or as window dressing?" I asked, more sharply than I'd intended. Vanessa flinched slightly. "That's not fair. Isn't it? The last time we spoke about anything other than the arrangement was at our family meeting 6 weeks ago." She had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I've been busy with work. The Keller case is going to trial next month." "And I've been busy too," I said, gesturing toward Sophia. "Life goes on, Vanessa, for all of us." She sighed, a sound of genuine fatigue. "Look, I'm trying here. Will you come to the dinner or not?" "Thank you for asking." Vanessa nodded, then hesitated, looking past me to where Sophia was carefully placing ripe tomatoes in a small basket. "She seems happy." "She is most of the time. Children are resilient when they feel safe and loved." "And her mother? Is she managing?" "Lucia works harder than anyone I've ever met." I said honestly. 2 jobs, saving every penny, taking online courses to improve her English. She's determined to build a better life for Sophia. Vanessa nodded again, something shifting in her expression. "The dinner is black tie. Do you need? Would you like to go shopping for a dress?" The olive branch was small but unmistakable. "That would be nice," I said. "Thank you." Our shopping trip that weekend was awkward at first, both of us careful to avoid controversial topics. But as we moved from store to store, something of our old rapport began to return. Vanessa helped me select a midnight blue gown that flattered my figure while accommodating my arthritic knees. I helped her find earrings that complemented her dress without overwhelming it. Over lunch, she surprised me by asking about the foundation. "How many families have you helped so far?" "Just Lucia and Sophia directly," I admitted. "But we've been able to provide financial assistance to 3 other families through the community center, helping with security deposits, first month's rent, utility connections." "And after the 3 months, what happens to Lucia and Sophia then?" I set down my fork, meeting my daughter's gaze directly. "That's the challenge. Affordable housing is scarce, and Lucia needs time to save enough for the upfront costs of an apartment. The foundation is looking at options, but..." "But what?" "But the most logical solution would be to extend their stay. They're stable, Sophia is doing well in school, and Lucia is making progress towards self-sufficiency. Disrupting that seems counterproductive." Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. "Richard and I have been talking," she said finally. "The boys have been quite vocal about the situation, especially Alexander." I waited, sensing something important in the offing. "We're considering a compromise," she continued. "The guest house could continue to be used by your foundation with some conditions. Proper screening of residents, regular reports to us, clear guidelines about use of the property." I was stunned. "That's a significant change of position." Vanessa shrugged, trying to appear casual, though I could see the tension in her shoulders. "It's a practical solution. The guest house is just sitting there, and the boys feel strongly about it." "Just the boys?" I asked gently. She met my eyes briefly, then looked away. "I've been doing some thinking too, about what you said, about privilege and responsibility." It wasn't a full conversion, but it was a start. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Thank you, Vanessa. This means a lot to me, and to families like Lucia and Sophia." The Westcott Foundation dinner the following weekend marked another turning point. Dressed in my new gown, I accompanied the family to the grand ballroom of the Westview Hotel. The event was exactly what I'd expected: hundreds of wealthy people in formal attire, congratulating themselves on their philanthropy while consuming a meal that cost more than many families' weekly food budget. What I hadn't expected was to be seated at the head table next to Richard, with Vanessa on his other side, nor had I expected Richard to mention me in his acceptance speech. "I want to thank my mother-in-law, Eleanor Wilson," he said, gesturing toward me. "She recently established a foundation providing transitional housing for families in crisis. Her work has inspired our family to think more deeply about how we can use our resources to make a direct impact in our community." The applause was polite but genuine. After the speech, several people approached me, asking about the foundation, expressing interest in supporting its work. I handed out the simple business cards Alexander had helped me design, explaining our mission with growing confidence. "It's been vacant for years, just gathering dust. Perhaps your foundation might be interested in repurposing it." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. That would be extraordinary. But wouldn't there be zoning issues? As she walked away, I felt Vanessa's presence beside me. "Was that Margaret Holloway?" she asked, a note of awe in her voice. "Yes, I believe that was her name. She mentioned something about a groundskeeper's cottage." Vanessa's eyes widened. "The Holloways practically founded Oakwood Estates. If she's interested in your foundation, that's significant." The evening continued in this vain introductions, expressions of interest, promises of support. By the time we returned home, I felt almost dizzy with possibilities. The foundation that had begun as a small act of rebellion was evolving into something with real potential, real community backing. The next morning, I was having coffee on the guest house patio when Vanessa appeared, still in her robe, her hair uncombed, a state of dishevelment I'd rarely seen her allow. "I couldn't sleep," she said without preamble, sitting across from me. "I kept thinking about what happened at the dinner, about Margaret Holloway and the others who were interested in your foundation." I poured her a cup of coffee, waiting. "All these years," she continued, staring into the cup, "I've been focused on appearances, on status, on what other people think, and then you come along with this. This crazy idea of turning our guest house into a shelter, and instead of being scandalized, people like Margaret Holloway are impressed." She looked up at me, genuine confusion in her eyes. "I don't understand." "People respond to authenticity," I said gently, "to actions that come from genuine conviction rather than social calculation. You've been playing a game by certain rules, but the rules are changing. Compassion is becoming fashionable." Vanessa snorted. "That sounds cynical." "Maybe, but if it leads to more people getting the help they need, does the motivation matter so much?" She considered this, sipping her coffee. "The boys think I'm heartless," she said suddenly, "especially Alexander. He told me I care more about our lawn than about human beings." "That's not true," I said, though there had been moments when I'd thought the same thing. "You care deeply about your family, about security, about creating a stable environment. Those aren't bad things." "But they're not enough, are they?" Her voice was small, almost childlike. "Not enough to make a life meaningful." I reached across the table and took her hand. "It's never too late to expand your definition of family, of security, to find meaning in new ways." She squeezed my hand, then pulled away, straightening her shoulders. "I should get dressed. I have a meeting at 9. But something had shifted between us. A door opened that couldn't be easily closed again. The real breakthrough came 2 weeks later. I was at the community center, meeting with Maria about potential residents for the groundskeeper's cottage. Margaret Holloway had indeed followed through, and the Homeowners Association had voted to lease the cottage to the foundation for a nominal fee, when my phone rang. It was Vanessa, her voice tight with urgency. "Mom, can you come to the house? Right away? It's important." "What's wrong? Is everyone all right?" Yes, just, please come. Now. I found her in the kitchen, pacing, her work clothes replaced by jeans, and a sweater another unusual sight. What's happened? I asked, alarmed by her agitation. I met Lucia today, she said abruptly. Really met her, I mean, talked with her. This was unexpected. Vanessa had maintained a careful distance from our guest house residents, acknowledging them with cool politeness when paths crossed but never engaging directly. How did that happen? I came home early, migraine starting, and she was here, in the main house, cleaning. Vanessa's voice held a note of accusation. I'd forgotten to mention that Lucia had taken on some house cleaning jobs to supplement her income, and Marguerite had hired her to help with deep cleaning the main house twice a month. She's been working for Marguerite. I should have told you. Yes, you should have, Vanessa resumed pacing. I found her in my office, dusting the bookshelves. I was not kind. I could imagine the scene. Vanessa, in pain and irritable, confronting a woman she perceived as an intruder. What happened? I accused her of snooping, said some things I'm not proud of, and she just took it. Apologized, explained she was just doing her job and kept working. Vanessa stopped pacing, her expression troubled. Then Sophia called. Hersha was in the kitchen with Marguerite. When Lucia answered, I heard her switch to Spanish, heard the love in her voice. She trailed off, shaking her head. And, I prompted. And I realized I knew nothing about her. This woman living on our property for nearly 2 months, and all I knew was that she was a case, a problem to be managed. So I asked her to have coffee with me. Right then. I raised my eyebrows, trying to picture this scene. What did you talk about? Everything. Her life in Guatemala, the abuse she endured from Sophia's father, her journey here, the job she works, her dreams for Sophia. Vanessa's voice caught. Mom, she has a degree in accounting from a university in Guatemala City. She was working in a bank there before she met Sophia's father. Now she's cleaning houses and serving food in a hospital cafeteria. I nodded. She's hoping to get her credentials recognized here eventually, but it's a complicated process. She showed me pictures of her family back home. Her mother looks like my 3rd-grade teacher, the one who used to give us stickers for good work. Vanessa laughed, a sound tinged with something like hysteria. How is it possible to live this close to someone for months and never see them as a real person? It was a genuine question, not rhetorical, and it deserved a thoughtful answer. We see what we're prepared to see, I said carefully. What fits our existing understanding of the world? It takes effort to see beyond that, to recognize the humanity in people we've categorized as other. Vanessa sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. I've been so wrong, Mom. About Lucia, about your foundation, about so many things. We're all wrong sometimes, I said, sitting beside her. The question is what we do when we realize it. She looked at me, her eyes clearer than I'd seen them in years. I want to help, really help, not just tolerate what you're doing. The foundation, Lucia and Sophia, all of it. What changed your mind? I asked, genuinely curious. Sophia has the same favorite color as I did at her age, purple. Lucia puts cinnamon in her coffee, just like Dad used to. They're people. Real people. She shook her head as if amazed by this discovery. And I've been treating them like inconveniences, like threats to my perfect life. Which isn't actually so perfect, I suggested gently. No. Vanessa's admission was barely audible. It's not. It's controlled and impressive and exhausting. And I'm not sure when I last felt truly happy. The vulnerability in her voice broke my heart. I reached for her hand, and this time, she didn't pull away. It's never too late to change course, Vanessa, to realign your life with what truly matters to you. I'm not even sure I know what that is anymore, she whispered. Then that's where we start, I said firmly, by figuring it out together. The next few weeks brought changes I could hardly have imagined when I first moved into the guest house. Vanessa threw herself into supporting the foundation with the same determination she brought to her legal career. She reviewed our organizational documents, strengthened our legal standing, and began introducing me to clients and colleagues who might be interested in supporting our work. Richard, following his wife's lead, offered to provide free medical checkups for foundation residents and began exploring how the hospital's community outreach program might partner with us. The twins became regular visitors to the guest house, with Alexander helping Sophia with her reading and Jonathan teaching her to swim in the main house pool, a privilege now extended without restriction. Most surprisingly, Vanessa and Lucia developed a genuine friendship. They were different in many ways, one privileged and driven, the other resilient and practical, but they shared a fierce devotion to their children and a determination to overcome obstacles. Vanessa began helping Lucia navigate the process of getting her accounting credentials recognized, while Lucia taught Vanessa to make traditional Guatemalan dishes that soon became family favorites. By the time the original 3-month agreement expired, the question of Lucia and Sophia leaving was never raised. Instead, Vanessa proposed converting part of the main house's third floor, rarely used except for storage, into a small apartment for another family in need. The zoning allows for it since it's still a single-family dwelling, she explained as we toured the space. We'd need to add a kitchenette and update the bathroom, but it's entirely doable. I stared at my daughter, hardly recognizing the woman who had once been so concerned about what the neighbors would think. Vanessa, that's extraordinary. She shrugged, but I could see the pleasure in her eyes at my approval. It makes sense, all the space going to waste, and families who need it. Besides, the boys will be off to college soon. The house will feel empty. The transformation wasn't just in our living arrangements. I began to see changes in Vanessa herself, subtle at first, then more pronounced. She started working from home more often, delegating cases that didn't align with her values. She resigned from committees that were more about social climbing than actual impact. She laughed more, listened more, seemed more present in her own life. One evening, about 6 months after I'd first moved Lucia and Sophia into the guest house, Vanessa asked me to join her for a walk around the property. The summer air was warm, fireflies beginning to flicker in the gathering dusk. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began as we strolled along the perimeter of the vast lawn, "about realigning my life with what truly matters." "And what have you concluded?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment, considering. "That I've been chasing the wrong things. Status, recognition, the approval of people whose values I don't even share." She glanced at me. "I think I lost sight of what you and Dad taught me, somewhere along the way." "We all wander off the path sometimes," I said. "The important thing is finding your way back." "That's just it," Vanessa said, stopping to face me. "I'm not sure I want to find my way back to where I was. I'm thinking of making some bigger changes." "Such as?" "I'm considering leaving the firm, starting my own practice focused on housing rights, tenant advocacy, that sort of thing." She smiled at my surprised expression. "I know, it's a complete turnaround. But working with the foundation, seeing the different stable housing makes for families like Lucia's. It's opened my eyes to what I could be doing with my law degree." I felt a swell of pride so intense it nearly brought tears to my eyes. "Your father would be so proud of you, Vanessa, as am I. Richard and I have been talking about the house." "Oh?" I tried to keep my voice neutral, though my heart rate quickened. "It's ridiculous, really, all this space for just us. Even with a third-floor apartment, and you in the guest house, most of it sits empty. We're thinking of downsizing, moving to something more reasonable." "And the foundation?" I couldn't help asking. Vanessa smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reminded me of the little girl she'd once been. That's the best part. We're considering donating this property to the Eleanor Wilson Foundation for transitional housing. The main house could be converted into apartments for multiple families, with common areas for community building, job training, childcare. I stared at her, speechless. The enormity of what she was suggesting, the value of the property, the potential impact, the complete reversal of her former positions was overwhelming. Of course, there would be conditions, she continued, seemingly unaware of my shock. The foundation would need proper governance, sustainable funding, professional management. But with the right structure, it could help dozens of families at a time, not just one or two. Vanessa, I finally managed. I don't know what to say. Say you'll help make it happen, she said simply. Say you'll continue what you started, this revolution of compassion that's changed all of us. I looked around at the vast property, the manicured lawns, the tennis court, the pool, the massive house that had once felt like a prison to me. I imagined it transformed, filled with families rebuilding their lives, children playing where once there had been only empty, perfect spaces. I thought of Harold, of what he would think of this outcome, and I knew he would be smiling his knowing smile. As we walked back toward the house, I saw lights in the guest house windows, where Lucia was probably helping Sophia with her homework. I saw Alexander and Jonathan on the patio, deep in conversation about something that had them both gesturing enthusiastically. I saw Richard through the kitchen window attempting to cook something with obvious concentration. My daughter had forced me to sell my home and move in with her, thinking she was rescuing me from independence that had become too burdensome. Instead, I had found a new purpose, a new strength, and in the process, had helped her rediscover the values that truly mattered. Together, we had turned her mansion into a shelter not just for Lucia and Sophia, but for all of us, a shelter from the hollow pursuit of status and appearance, a shelter where authentic connection and compassion could flourish. At 67, I had started a revolution, and it was only just beginning.